Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How you doing? This is Frostbite. Thank you so much for coming in and hanging out with me today. Give you
Hey,
kind
good
of a
evening,
little
ladies
bit
and
of
gentlemen. How you
overview
doing?
This is Frostbite
Thank you
of what's
so
going
much
to
for coming
happen
in.
and hanging out with me today. Give you
Hey,
kind
good
of a
evening,
little
ladies
bit
and
of
gentlemen. How you
overview.
doing?
This is Frostbite
Thank you
of what's
so
going
much
to
for coming
happen
in.
and hanging out with me today. Give you
Hey,
kind of
good
a
evening,
little bit
ladies and
of
gentlemen. How you
Sorry about that. Had a little bit of feedback going on, and I was echo. Let's get that taken care of. All right. Well, I hope you all are good. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate you coming in to the stream today. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Today, we're going to be talking not just about coins, but we're going to actually be
about that?
talking
Had a little bit of
about
feedback going on.
American history. We're going to be looking at why and what happened in our nation and what we need to do or what happened in order for our nation to become the land of the free. We're going to be talking about a number of different elements, looking at things like um, the various wars, the colonies, the relationships that happen with differing nations, some of the pros and the cons that happen. We're going to be talking about various forefathers. We're going to be looking at a bunch of different elements. Now, on the screen, you're going to be saying, excuse me, you're going to be seeing a bunch of imagery. If you're looking at the vertical mode, you're going to be seeing it down below. If you're looking at the horizontal, you're going to be seeing it all over the place. And the purpose for this is to not tie in line directly with what's happening in the
in
discussion,
Congress July 4th,
but just, whoops,
1776.
hold on,
The unanimous
whoops, started that a little bit too soon. Get that out of the way. Um, Trying to get set up here, and for some reason, I just hit the wrong button. All right, here we go. Um, so there's going to be a ton of history, and I mean a ton of history. We're going to be looking at just the whole thing across the board. So I don't expect anybody to be here the entire time. If you are, great. But if not, don't sweat it. Come in, come out, listen to little pieces here and there. But I want you to do me a favor. I want you to hit the thumbs up button, at least like, share, do whatever. Yep, just like freaking awesome did. Thank you, freaking awesome. Definitely appreciate it. But what I really want you to do is while you watch this, if you have questions, ask your question. Now, I'm not necessarily going to be the person who's able to answer all of them. Um, what I've done is a lot of research to find information. I'm going to be bringing it and talking to you about the things that I've uncovered. If we want to dig deeper into something, we're going to do that. But what I want to do, I want to honor the fundamental foundation of who we are as a nation. If you like what you hear as we're going through this, and I don't expect you to be here the entire, but consider subscribing to the channel. I have a special thing today. If and we're 180 away, so it's a long way. It's a big goal. But if I can get to 6,000 subs, I've got a collector's piece, Scottsdale Mint. It is the Dragon Longshin. It's 2005. And I'm going to give that away along with a few silver coins. And that's if I can get to 6,000 subscribers tonight. So we're looking at 130 some odd subscribers. So if you do that, please, give me a thumbs up. Let you know. Thank you. If you're doing that in the vertical mode, I won't get notification. Um, when you do, please just say something like subscribed. I'll call you out. I'll say thank you. But what I am going to do, and this is something that I've been doing in every one, on this weekend streams, I'm going to pull all the subscribers' names and I'm going to throw them in the description of my Saturday and Sunday live stream so that you guys get acknowledged. That way you'll see your name and you'll be tagged in those videos. And that way you can understand that I do appreciate the subscriptions. All right, so let me go through and say hi to everybody. I am monitoring two streams, so if I miss you, I apologize. My intent is not that. Amy Harrell, good evening. Tiger Stacker, Frosty makes computer apes. How you doing, bud? Good to see you. FG Stacker, new subscriber. Vote for Pedro. What's up, buddy? Happy Independence Day. Thank you so much for being here. Jack Gallman from Marion, North Carolina is here. Let's see. Freaking Awesome has already shared. Thank you so much for doing that. Michael Stacking, they just came over from a raid. He just invited me up on his channel just a few minutes ago. So thank you so much for the opportunity to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to dig straight in. Now, if it sounds unrehearsed, hey folks, I've wrote this script over the course of the last. Bear with me. Again, I'm not a historian, so if I fumble, understand that I too. All right. So why do we celebrate the 4th of July? What a great screen for this one, right? We the people, the Declaration of Independence. Do we celebrate the 4th of July in the United States? Celebrate just that, the independence. We consider this a very momentous day. This is when brave leaders signed a document that declared freedom against tyranny. Now, we cherish this freedom. This is something that every true-blooded American really wants to do. Thank you so much for the super chat. 4.99 Tiger Stacker. No one likes just giving him money. I'm testing. Don't tell Frosty. He's funny. Thanks for the super chat, Tiger. Definitely appreciate that. And just so you know, if you give a membership or if you do super chats, your name will show up down below on that horizontal mode. Feel free to do that, but I don't require anybody. Oh, Jack Gallman just retired. Congratulations, everybody. Give Jack a hand. Congratulations on the retirement, dude. That is awesome. And what a great day to do that on. Get to celebrating a long weekend. Um, hey, Dimebag, what's going up? Good to see you. What's up, Jackknife? I appreciate it. No worries. You guys lurk all you want to. Okay, so let's go back into this. All right. Well, one thing that people have to remember when they talk about the 4th of July is the cherished freedom didn't just happen overnight. Our freedom wasn't easily won. Countless lives from multiple nations were lost in the struggle for independence, and struggle for freedom. And this is very important because it was a culmination of a long journey, a very challenging journey that began many years before the Revolutionary War. This started when the first courageous Europeans sought out to settle a new and recently found and untamed land. So, as I go through this narrative, as I talk about this thing, I want you to take notice. Listen to some of the things, listen to the major events, the choices that were made, the battles that happened. I want you to listen to step by step breakdown of distant colonies separating themselves from a monarch, walking away, forming their own brand new nation. And again, this wasn't a sudden burst of rebellion. This happened over time. It was a very organic growth. And so the very act of colonization in this particular one was a very unique experience. And you're going to see throughout this time, the first people to come across were not adaptable. In fact, they were far equipped from it. They didn't work plan. They didn't know what they were doing. And so we're going to see a lot of this. But what did come out of this is a deep-seated love and appreciation for being able to locally control and govern our own body. This is the tenet. This is the basis of freedom. So in all of this, where do we begin? Where do we first start this? Well, we have to start at the founding of Roanoke, which is just before the birthplace of the place we all know, Jamestown. So, what happened with Roanoke? Well, Roanoke was one of the first attempts of English settlers to come over. Now, this was more of a military style base. Severe consequences for not following the things that needed to be followed. There were very harsh environments, and the colony was set up to kind of structure itself as a launching point for gold exploration, silver exploration. Most of you are stackers or collectors, and many of you know that we call gold and silver God's money. But it was one of the driving forces, the potential for wealth, that actually led people to come to the new nation. Now, we're going to see that during this founding of Roanoke, a lot of the people who came here were ill equipped for that. Not only were they ill equipped, but by 1590, many of the settlers had mysteriously disappeared. They just vanished, disappeared. They were gone. And this leaves a lasting question. What happened to the remaining people? Were they captured? Did they die? Did they go away, try to find a better place? Whatever happened to the remaining people at Roanoke? Well, one thing we do know is that despite the setbacks that happened, the crown said, we need to go back. There were very expensive merchants who had invested a lot of money, and they were saying there's too much potential for wealth. We've got to go back. And they're like, well, we've lost a whole group of people. We don't know that we can do this. And so they stood in front of each other and said, hey, we just finished negotiating with Spain. This was 1604. We have economic pressures. We have a looming war. And we've got to come up with a way to bring money back to England because we've got to be able to finance this. And so, because of that, there were more renewed investors in the war. MLZB, what's up? Thanks for coming in. Appreciate the subscription. So, James the First, King James the First, decided that he was going to grant two distinct groups access to be able to charter the trip back over to this new land. One of them was the Plymouth colony. We're all very familiar with those folks. And then the other one was the London Company. Now, what the people don't know about this is the London Company. See, the London Company actually acted more swiftly than the Plymouth colony, right? The Plymouth Company did send people out. We know them, the Pilgrims, and they landed at Plymouth Rock. We know that story. But a lot of people forget about the founding at Jamestown. And that happened because the London Company took such swift action and came over with the Susan Croissant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. They carried 105 people, and the voyage, which began December 1606, was just like all the other ones. It was fought with pressure and problems. People were dying across. I think they only had one person die en route, but when they got there, they finally got to the Virginia coast and they did careful exploration of the area. And then Captain Newport, who was the expedition leader, finally decided that the James River, because of its proximity to the ocean, its availability to get inland, was the place where they were going to choose this. Remember that they came by ship. So all of their stores, all of those items were going to be shipped across. So they had to have a place that allowed for deep port. It had to be able to be uh, trees and stuff like that had to be available. And the river was something that allowed for migration up and down that area. So you could get stores and wildlife and game and things of that nature. Because again, you're in this area, your water was extremely important. The problem was is that the area in which they docked was very prone to, um, because of the swampy conditions, because of where they were located, was very prone to diseases. There was a salty, brackish water. It was very swampy, and because of this, one primary disease, as malaria, really kind of took hold, and widespread disease really screwed with the colony at Jamestown. Now, we are talking about people that relied on a foreign country across the ocean. Sometimes it took weeks, if not months, to traverse that distance. God forbid that the ship carrying your stores would sink or would suffer a severe storm or have famine on board and they wouldn't make it, would have to turn around and go home. You were reliant upon stores. You were reliant upon those constant supplies. And because of that constant need, bad weather, sickness, and things like that made it very, very difficult for the colonies to grow. They also had issues because of the harsh winters that they had to face there and problem with the indigenous tribes that were in that area because negotiations didn't always handle well. They had problems in the early colonies. The other thing, and this is one of the things that is really important. Now, I'm not promoting this book. This is just something. that I do. And this is the book called The Lost Faith. And why do I have this? Well, because if you're ever in an SH situation, or you're ever in a place where you need to be able to learn how to do a fire, or ways that the old people lived without electricity, and knowing how to maintain and build your certain and build things and do shelters, and store meat, the importance of salt. We forget these things because we live in an environment where we don't have to do them every day. Why am I saying this? Well, because the people who came over were fairly upper class Englishmen. These were investors. They were unaccustomed to labor. They were unaccustomed to exploration. They were unaccustomed to medical needs. They were unaccustomed to um, the building of a tame of farming. They were building statue or uh, uh, protection, right? Defenses, fencing, understanding the wilderness environment, how to deal with sickness, how to deal with disease. These were upper um, echelon Englishmen. These were the wealthy, the elite, and they had no business coming over other than the fact that there was a promise of wealth, and everybody wanted to jump on that wealth train. Again, the premise for many people to come over was search for precious metals. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because we have to remember why people were coming across, and we have to remember why people were looking at uh, coming to the new nation. This was something that we have to look at those, right? We have to pay attention to those. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the next place. So when we look at the issues that happen and some of the problems, I talked about the relationships with the natives, and this is something that he's in the chat right now. Vote for Pedro and I were talking about when I was explaining to him that I was doing this. And one of those was the powerful Powhatan Confederacy. This was a strong Indian tribe of 14 Algonquian speaking Native Americans, Chief Potawatomi, um, Powhatan, I always say that wrong, sorry. And there were a lot of discrepancies. There were a lot of initial conflicts with the natives. Number one, we were taking up their area. We were knocking down their forests. We were inadvertently crossing lands that had ceremonial content, and we were the new people in town, right? We were the ones who were coming in, and we were trying to take over the loud and or the land. I don't know why it's getting louder. Maybe it's because I moved my mic. And because of this, there were difficulties. But with that difficulty became a man who really tried to establish relationship. And one of those people was by the name of Captain John Smith. Now, a lot of people, Captain John Smith and what happened and how he played the critical role in engaging the Padawans for things like food survival, supplies, how to plant, growing things like maize, and really trying to grow the civilization and grow this powerful nation relationship, right, with the colonies. Because again, without those relationships, without that growing, we wouldn't have been able to um, we wouldn't have been able to survive. There's just no way we would have been able to make it through the very rough, starving times that were there. So the relationships with these folks were very, very important. It got so low that out of 1,700 colonists that originally came over, only about 351 actually survived this really tough starving time. It was some really bad weather. They had some famine that happened, some sickness that went through, and it just decimated the colony. But because of the relationships that had been done, they were able to survive the brutal winter. They had new people come over, added new supplies. And then by 1622, that originally 300 people ended up becoming back up to 400 in 1617. And then by 1622, just 5 years later, it had grown back up to 1240. So you'll see that the relationships with the indigenous were very important for establishing these relationships and for growing the civilizations. Unfortunately, it's these relationships that we would ultimately use against them. And when we talk about any kind of history, when we talk about the growth of any kind of civilization, you're going to see not only the utilization of that indigenous, the exploitation of them at some point. Now, unfortunately, this is just a part of history. It's not an acceptable part, but we can't go back and change the things that happened. What we can do, we can acknowledge them, acknowledge that they were mistakes that were made, and try not to repeat in the future. Ultimately, that's what our nation is founded on. Again, folks, I appreciate you here. If you're here and you like what you're seeing so far, you like the history, consider subscribing. Again, it's free for you, but it really does help the channel. And if I can get 170 subscribers at the end of this presentation, a couple hours, I'm going to be giving a collector's piece from the Scottsdale Mint away, along with some other things. I do have some random giveaways to be giving to people in chat. So if you are in chat, please do me a favor, make sure you're chatting, hit that like button, and let me know that you're here. And if you're a brand new subscriber, one of my moderators, please write the word subscribed, and then we'll say thank you. And if you come across on the landscape side, I'll get notifications. I'll let you know. But I do appreciate all that you all do. So let's go check out what chat said. Just did a video on imperialism and how America is killing control. You know what? We can talk about policies, but we're talking about independence now. Let's kind of keep on track, if you would, Neil. Thanks. The diseases they contracted. Yep, absolutely. But again, right now, I don't care if you guys have the conversation between yourselves. You want to share that? That's fine with me. I'm not going to be poo-pooing anybody. Just be respectful in the things that are being said. That's all I ask. Okay, that's really all I ask. Sherry Ward liked and chatted. Thank you so much for that, Sherry. Definitely appreciate you. All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about one of the first governing documents of the soon to be United States. And that happened with the Pilgrims. Now, again, we talked about the London company that came over. The second one that came over in this definitely delayed about a decade and a half. And this was 1620. And the document, I'm going to put this up into chat. Um, if you'll do me a favor, if anybody in chat can do the right answer, I'm going to give away a couple copper rounds. The copper rounds have been donated by Paula Bloom of Livecoin QA. And so if you can tell me the first governing document that was issued in 1620 that basically allowed us a governing structure, the first one that actually governed our nation, then I'm going to write your name down and I'm going to send you um, one of these two sets of copper rounds. And I've got the photo, I'll have to pull it out here in a minute. But they're really neat pieces. I've actually asked her to send me one because it was something that I wanted to have myself. Um, Anybody? 1620, distinct group of settlers came across and created what document? I'll give you guys just a second before I go on. Any guesses? Great Scott, Articles of Confederation. No, that is not correct. This came a little bit later. Give you guys just a second longer. Yeah, that's way, 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 way too late. We're talking 150 years too late. Nope, not the Declaration of Independence. 9 for 9 just super chatted 10 bucks. Dag nabbit, late fee applied. Thanks, 9 for 9. Appreciate that. I'm going to give you guys just a second longer. So far, I haven't got the correct answer. We're going to give you guys about 30 seconds. Stocking Surfer, what's up? Good to see you. All right. Great Scott. There you go. Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact. I'm going to put Great Scott down. Okay. Great Scott, email me. And let me know that you got the copper rounds, okay? I'll make sure. I got a few more of those to give away. But the Mayflower Compact, yes. The Mayflower Compact, which came from the primarily religious Pilgrim separatists, was founded on the ship. They actually took that element and forged the rules and the governing. They said this is what is going to govern us. They actually broke that down because what they understood is if they went and they took it upon themselves to land without some sort of elective structure, without some sort of court-based governance, without some way of making laws and applicable justice, they knew that they would be deemed to repeat the problems of the previous colonies. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to make sure that the Plymouth colony survived. And the early successes in having the court system and having these things in place was extremely important. David Carlisle says that he had it beforehand. Um, I'm looking. I don't see it. If it did, take a screen capture and email it to me. Yeah, I did see it. If you did say that, then do me a favor, screenshot it, send it to me, and I'll make that right. Um, but again, it was this early commitment to making sure that they succeeded, right? Having a self governance. Again, when you're looking at um, when you're looking at these things, when you're looking at the structure of our United States, one of the things is the self-governance, and you're going to hear this in many of those things. You talk about the Articles of Confederation. We're going to talk about the items that were done in the First Continental Congress, right? Now, but when you look at these other things, you're going to be looking at um, Declaration of Independence and the self-governance. You're going to be looking at the Constitution and being able to self-governance. Anytime we've been successful as yes, here in the horizontal chat. Okay. Um, so I've got 2 chats, and I forgot I was running on 2 chats. I have one that's blended into both, but that's okay. Yeah, no worries. It's all good. Um, I will make sure I rectify that, so I appreciate that, David. Send me an email, and I'll make sure you get one too. Um, I got 2 different streams, so I'm watching them both, but I just didn't see it, so no worries. Yeah, so Sherry, I'm running in vertical and landscape mode. I'm doing that because there's some people that don't want to see this on a computer and they have it on their phone. It's way easier for them to watch it on their phone. Now you can turn it sideways, but you lose chat. So I stream in both. Um, yeah, but the thing is it really doesn't matter. You can see it in yours. That's all that matters. It's up to me, and it benefits the end user. That's what's important. So if it's confusing, I'm sorry, but that's just the way I do my. Um, so again, the Mayflower Compact, extremely important, extremely vital, and it was one of those things where without that self governance, the Plymouth colony wouldn't have been as successful as they were. Um, Now, what that also allowed, this vital element allowed, was for the Native Americans to understand the rules that governed them, right? And because of that, we were able to forge a peace treaty with the Wampanoag tribe led by Chief Massasoit. Now, this was an extremely important agreement, and this thing lasted over 50 years. Now, many of you growing up as kids, when you would talk about the Indians, heard the name Squanto. Now, this is a Paxuit Native American who previously was kidnapped by the English explorers, was then taken back and then came back over and was able to communicate back and forth. And it was this relationship, again, exploitation of one tribe to benefit us later on, right? We're going to see this throughout history. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter what civilization you're in, this is a common practice, but it does need to be acknowledged, right? There were some atrocities that happened through every nation, and these are just things that are going to have to be acknowledged. I don't want to delve on them, but I definitely want to make sure that they're acknowledged because, again, many people suffered for the independence, not just the people who fought for it. There were people who suffered needlessly and we have to make sure that we protect and honor their legacy and their commitment to what they had to do. But it was this Paxswift native who actually was able to teach them skills, communicate with others, and ultimately led to what we know as the first Thanksgiving. Now, the first Thanksgiving wasn't celebrated like the first Thanksgiving. Obviously, it just happened. That would come way later on. It would be appointed by a president. But again, it's one of those things. Oh, no, 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 no. Nobody's blocked. Um, I have that open. I can promise you that. Nobody's blocked. Unless somebody uh just did that. But yeah, nobody's blocked on mine. Um, the other thing that it was very important for is the economic um maintenance of the Plymouth colony. It was the one where, because they were more commonplace people, they had a better structure, they had a better setup, they were able to sustain farming. And the lessons learned from the Padawans helped them to establish a subsistent agricultural structure. And they were also able to look at things of how do we disseminate and how do we lay out our labor? How do we choose people for certain roles? And because of this, there was a structure, and this structure ended up becoming very, very important. In fact, it was this structure and this governance body that would be picked up by many other settling colonies afterwards, and that allowed for great success across that eastern seaboard during this time frame. But as stated all through the 1600s and into the 1700s, more and more colonies were established. But that just meant that there were going to be more and more encounters, there were going to be more and more conflicts, and more problems when it comes to expansion and growth. And it's because of this, the dispersed settlements, the gaps in between, that we needed to find ways to prevent the escalation of the tensions between the notable tribes. One of the first ones that happened in 1636 was a conflict with the Pequot, and this was the King Philip's War. Now, this also happened um, 40 years apart. So the first one was 1636, and then the next one was 1675. But these two highlighted the frustration of the natives against the constant belittling and disputes over territories. And these particular ones are frequently used by ways or by people who would say, "Well, look at what the look at what the indigenous population did. Look at these atrocities," but they forget about the things that had happened ahead of times. And so there were some really brutal um, realities for the colonists during this time frame, and unfortunately, there were some atrocities that happened on both ends. But because of this, we really needed to force. And here's a famous person for you, see if you can that is. Um, but because of this, Jamestown and Plymouth colonies had to set some stuff up. They had to advance themselves. They had to find ways to really get its footing and maintain that relationship, maintain that growth. And that Mayflower Compact, again, being utilized where the elected officials were there, actually allowed what they call the paradox of colonial successes to external conflicts. Because what the Mayflower Compact eventually led into was the recognition that, you know what, even though the the colonists were from England, they were still loyal to this. There were problems that were being developed as more and more goods were being sent over, as things like taxation, as the war in England increased. We started to identify that, well, we're not actually given the same rights. In fact, we weren't even being held to the same laws. We were having things that were being given that were killing us. And we were having crops like tobacco. Tobacco cultivation was extremely profitable in Virginia. And the crown was coming in and they were trying to take this from us. They were trying to say, well, hey, you're part of our you know breakout. You're part of our structure, and you need to pay us dividends on what you make. Well, obviously, this was really tough on the Plymouth colony because they were thriving on this. They were doing very well. And the British came in and said, "Hey, you owe us money." Well, like, well, hold on. We're struggling. We need money to buy supplies, and now you're wanting to take this away from us. And because of that, we're running into problems with being able to maintain and survive, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to go through what's happening right now because we just don't agree with it. This caused additional tensions between the British Crown and um, the sorry, I'm trying to reach out. I got distracted between the British Crown and the colonists. Now, this is one of those things where I read at the very beginning that this wasn't a just a singular onset. There were a bunch of little things that happened during this time frame. So let's go from this war. Let's talk about the atrocities that happened. But let's break into we'll kind of advance about 70 or 80 years, and we'll start talking about how this started to afflict conflicts. And the first one that I really want to break into is I really and marshes, I don't like tea anyways. Well, the problem was is that they were all British, right? They loved their tea. Um, but tea wasn't just um, something to drink. There were cultural normatives that had to be met. There were socialite value structure and systems about having tea time. It was a thing to refresh yourself. It was something to sit down and have at breakfast and have that conversation. It was a time to separate from the busy workings of the day. And again, it was just important for people. So not only was it a beverage, it was also a very important social norm. And again, you'll see this throughout history. Social normatives are extremely uh, important when we're looking at um, conduct and social structure and things of that nature. All right, so let's go look at some of the issues we faced when it comes to the crown and pushing the desire for money and stuff like that. Again, folks, if you're new here and you're trying to figure out what this is about, this is a special session that we're doing for the 4th of July. We're talking about the histories, how we became a nation, some of the problems that we had. If you like what you see, we do a lot of history, we do a lot of coins, a lot of silver gold stacking, a lot of collaborations, and have a lot of amazing people up on panels. Please consider subscribing, hit that like, say something in chat, say hi. And I'm going to be giving something away again here in a little while as we get to the going to get a little bit more in depth into the war aspects of what we've suffered during this time frame. One of the major ones that I want to talk about was the French and Indian War. Now, the French and Indian War, we were 1680s, and now we're up into the 1750s. Why the major jump? Well, again, the nation didn't just all of a sudden decide it wanted to be free. There were a lot of things that were happening. And one of the things that was happening is the French, the Spanish, and the English vie for power. And because of this constant battle, there were always relationships and discussions between things like the French and the English, the French and the Spanish. There were conglomerations that were created. There were agreements that were agreed because when one got too strong, then the other two wanted to quell that. And then the other one built up, and then the other two wanted to quell that. Well, one of the problems that we faced during this time frame was the French. And the French were at battle with each other, as well as with the English. And during this time frame, British and French colonists in North America, along with their allies, were really trying to stave off the British coming in and saying, "Hey, we want money," and the Catholic Church coming in and saying, "Hey, we don't want the new France. We want a subordinate body." The English Church was coming in and saying, "Hey, we want a subordinate body. We want these people." to do this, and they were trying to tap into a very lucrative fur trade. Now, from those of you up in Canada, you know that during this time frame, this was a very tumultuous time frame. The fur trade was huge. There was a lot of money in it. Not only was it something that was um, important for clothing and protection, it was also something that was utilized to ship back and to trade. Right, these were things that were traded with the locals, with the natives, or they would trade with us for silver or tools or weapons or things of that nature. It was very important for us to be able to establish those things, and the fur trade was one of those. But because of this competition, and because of this engagement of the altering nations, this led to a major competition with the conflict known as the French and Indian War. Now, this lasted about 9 years, 1754 to 1763. And in North America, it was a very significantly larger theater than we had ever experienced. Now, we had experienced something called the 7 Years' War. This was key battles where the British victories, like Louisburg and things like that, were crucial over waterways and keeping the French out of certain areas. But this particular one was very large, and it included aspects of Canada as well as what we consider the colonies in the Northern America at this time frame. And it was huge, and it went all the way till 1763. And then there was something that happened, and this is not the first time we will hear these words. We will hear these words multiple times, and that is the Treaty of Paris. Now, understand that the Treaty of Paris was not a one-time thing. The Treaty of Paris actually happened a number of times. And you'll hear these things called the Treaty of Paris, the Paris Accord, the Paris Acts. There's a number of these things throughout history where we went to France and we agreed on the terms and conditions of a surrender, the settlement of lands, the disputation, the dispute of borders. There were all these things that happened during this particular time frame. And because of the Treaty of Paris in 1763, this ended that particular set of conflicts. But the terms to this was that France seceded, hold on, said that wrong, not seceded, France ceded. There's ceded and seceded. One is to totally leave, and the other one is to give portions of. This was ceded away all of its territory. When you hear the Indians secede lands, it means that they got to keep a portion of them. When you talk about ceding lands or ceded lands, it means they had to give everything up. So I mix those up every once in a while. So bear with me. I apologize. But it had to cede all of its territories in North America to Britain. Now, this was huge for the British. But what it also did is it alienated us from treaties and the French that we would trade through, right? It alienated those people that helped us establish some of these relationships. So even though for the nations it was a good deal, it wasn't for the locals. It wasn't for the people who lived here because it actually ended French colonial rule in North America. And many of these things brought relationships with the indigenous tribes. And if you've watched, movies throughout history, you'll see that the French were had great relationships, especially up in Canada, and we needed many of those relationships to get some of those goods. And because of this, that basically eliminated that from us, and it caused some serious hardship. But what it did is it gave the benefit of Britain to establish basically dominant colonial power. And it was this dominant colonial power that would relieve the initial stresses of um, the angst of the king of England. Now we have control. Now we can start doing these other things. But it relived some of those grievances that we talked about in the hundreds. What were those? Well, after that French and Indian War, because they were the American colonists, and they were now under British military protection, they should be required to pay for the costs. And again, this was one of the first tariffs, one of the first transactions where Britain said, well, now that we've won, you owe us protection money, right? This is kind of like, the Goodfellas, right? Hey, you're going to pay us protection, right? So this was Big Brother saying, hey, you owe us money for being there. Um, we're not going to govern you as a sovereign state. We're not going to do this as a sovereign place. You just owe us protection. Oh, by the way, you don't get any of the benefits of being an English citizen because you've separated from us, but you're under the control and all the requirements from a monetary standpoint. And this really upset a lot of people. Because what happened is this allowed for large standing armies to be present inside our the not well not United States then, but the colonies. And this was a major problem because not only for France, not only for Spain, but this caused tension with those nations. Why? Well, because when you have large standing armies, then anybody who is on your border is at risk. And so both the French up in Canada and Spain, who had the central portion of the United States all the way into what is now California and up north, they had that whole area was under Spanish control. Now we started to stick our nose into the Spanish business and the French business. And so more and more troops were being brought over, larger and larger British forces were being come over. And now we have this giant standing army. And this led to something called the Pontiac Rebellion just a few years later. Now, because of this, the British had adopted what they call a handoff approach, which is or which led to something called salutatory neglect. All right. So here's the next one that I'm going to ask to the audience. So if you're listening and you can Google this, I don't mind. What was salutatory neglect? Um, do you happen to know what it is? If you can put something in there, look it up. Try to find out. Many people don't even know what this term is. But salutatory neglect is one of the items that actually was the second pin in our pin cushion that caused us to explode. I don't know if you've ever seen the example. I wish I had a balloon. You could put a piece of tape and put a balloon and stick a needle through it, right? And so you do that and the needle doesn't pop, or the needle doesn't pop the balloon. It actually can be pushed in and opened up and it will pop. And so they had put the tape over there, which is the standing forces, but the needles were getting pushed in, right? We were seeing more and more needles. The salutatory neglect was the second item that really, really stood out and made us frustrated with the British rule. Why was that? Very good. Um, Anybody else said that it refrained from enforcing trade law? Well, basically, OC, that's correct. It was an unofficial British policy that basically said you're responsible to all the laws and requirements. However, the standing army is not. And what they would do is they would actually hold mock items. Now, you're going to see this very specific language in the Declaration of Independence. So, when I have Bernard read that later on, you're going to listen to the fact that they talk about salutatory neglect. You're going to hear them talk about the fact that you made special trials. You took the guilty, the murder that was being created by the army, and you basically waved it off. And so you held us to the statute. We were held to crimes of murder and thievery and not paying taxes. However, the army was not, and that was the salutatory neglect. And that was a massive, massive issue for the members of the colonies. Again, folks, if you're here, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, check out the channel. There's a lot of great information. This is a special one. We primarily talk about silver coins, stacking, collecting, how to protect yourself. I'm big on how to protect the community against things like counterfeiting and giving you good information. So again, if this is something you like and you're just listening, please hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and set those reminders. I do want to say something else. If you were in chat and you haven't watched the short that I did regarding July's contest, please go check that out. All you've got to do is watch that video, make an assessment. Do you think it's real or do you not? Put the comment in chat, subscribe if you would, and you have an opportunity to win some silver coinage. So that's free to everybody, no cost to do that. And again, there's no wrong answers, just only opportunities to learn. So go check that out. If I can have somebody, OC or somebody, throw that link in there, I would greatly appreciate it. All right, so let's go ahead and break back into this. So, one of the issues with statutory neglect was a proclamation made in 1763. Now, this was shortly after the war, and it happened with a forbade of a settlement in the Appalachian Mountains. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to prevent any future costs from conflicts with future Americans. Now, why would the British want to do this? Well, because they were having to protect, and so you have to maintain it, you have to have troops, and that becomes very costly. And so what they didn't want to do is they didn't want to have to maintain that with their own dollar. What they wanted to do is they wanted to utilize the resources, the wealth, the money that was coming up, the taxes on trade to pay for these particular things. Now, these things were things we were doing on our own. But now they wanted to pay for them to do something we'd never really asked them to do. So they wanted to be present, but they didn't want to give us anything. But they had to maintain that level of control because, again, having that standing army in the colonies was a step towards expansion and pushing those borders with Spain and France, not only just in Canada, but across what would be Spanish territory in the central US. So as they did this, they issued this proclamation, and what the colonists did is obviously looked at as an infringement upon economic opportunity and growing the resentment across the British Crown. Now, from this, we talk about what happens and what was going on in the frustration. But after a while, statutory neglect did end. But it ended with something that was even worse, and that was what was called direct control. Now, the acquisition of the new territories meant that British had to increase their responsibilities. They had increased challenges. They had to manage those territories, and so this required more army. Right? Again, more troops, more lands, more territories, more army. More army, more protection, more money. And you can see that this was a really vicious cycle that was starting to happen. And what happened is they stopped the statutory neglect and said, what we're going to do is we're going to take away your ability to self govern. And we're now actually going to intervene with this thing called direct intervention. This was done through parliamentary power, and this was appointed on the colonists of without, let me say it that way, without their without their consent. And this was another one of the pins that got put into this balloon that eventually would pop. Again, the Foundation for Freedom was a slow, arduous process. It wasn't something that was quick. There were a lot of complaints, a lot of communication that happened with the Crown and looking at things like, hey, we need to understand that we are good at self governing ourselves. Just give us that opportunity. And the Crown was saying, no, 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 no. That's not what's going to happen. That's not how this works. We have a standing army, and you are going to follow our rule. Basically, martial law, right? So this had a massive issue where the relationships between the colony started escalating. And even though the elimination of the French in North America was significant, they started to build relationships with the French again because we needed to do that. Now, they were out of the picture as far as Britain was concerned, and they were separated, but there were still relationships there. We still had people who were going to France. We still had people from the colonies, especially up north. You'll see here in Maryland, Maine. In this particular one, the New France of that time frame. This was all taken over by the British, However, there were still a lot of relationships that were there. And because of this, we started to ensure that we could, call on those people in times of need. And you're going to hear about things like Lafayette, who was really important with gaining French support, bounce back and forth between US and French, more for self recognition and growth. But you'll see that these relationships continue to stand all the way through into the Revolutionary War. But because of the removal of the French threat, the tribes now being removed of their protection, because again, the French were way better at the relationships with the tribes of that area than we were. This started to cause even more escalation. So again, we talk about what was happening in the initial one. So they did the statutory neglect. They did this to, say that we want to prevent the rising costs. But what they actually did is they actually increased this. And so, um, James, I missed what you were saying, so I apologize. Um, the clarify if you mean, um, but what this actually ended up doing is it caused more and more conflict because the people who were protecting the tribes at that time, which was the French, had been removed, and so now they were under the much more harsh, less tolerant British troops, and again, this continued to sow the seed of disgruntlement, and so this is something that was um, extremely frustrating. So James, you're talking too conservative. Yeah, I'm not breaking into each one of these. Uh, there were serious atrocities that happened, and I mentioned that already. But I'm not going to. There's no way in the time that I have that I can delve into a specifics. Remember, I'm going all the way into the Revolutionary War. I'm going to be talking about the documents, breaking that stuff down. So yes, I am skirting a lot of the issues. But again, I've stated at the very beginning, there's a lot of atrocities here. It's not to be undermined. But I'm not delving into all of those in depth. If you want to know more about those, we can dig into that. Just send me a request to dig something in, and I'll be more than happy to do that. It's just I just don't have the time right now to do so. So when we talk about additional things that sparked frustration earlier, it was stated that I don't like tea anyway. And we understand that there was the Boston Tea Party, but way before the Boston Tea Party, the seeds of discontent with taxation were already started. And it comes not from taxing, not from being taxed, but from being taxed without a say so, being taxed without representation. So when you see this, people's like, well, I don't like taxes. Well, it was never about taxes, it was the taxation without representation. It was about not being able to have input from what we were doing and how things were taxed and unfair tax practices and taxing those things that were vital to our growth, things that were stifling. And so the thing that really kind of crushed this and really put a lot of angst in the mindset of the colonists was something called the Stamp Act. Now, the Stamp Act happened in 1765 on March 22nd. And this is when the British Parliament passed a law, and it lit the fire under the colonists. See, this was a direct tax, and it meant that the colonists not only were required to pay it, but they had to purchase a special stamp on paper for all printed materials. This was a tax on paper. Oh, they had to pay for the paper, and then they had to pay a tax on it. And then they had to pay for a stamp for the paper that they bought. And it just got worse, right? There were more and more issues like this. Essentially, what that meant is that legal documents like contracts, wills, everyday newspapers, pamphlets, playing cards, dice, anything you wanted to do that required the use of paper had a tax associated with it. The rationale for this was the British military troops were still paying for this very costly war that they started. um, and that the colonists were responsible for paying that protection fee. They want to do the protection fee, but they were against that. You see, they had already put people in. They had already volunteered for that. They had already contributed for the war effort. And now they were saying, well, you need to pay more. You need to pay more. And it becomes more and more and more and more. And now that in peacetime, there was no longer a balancing force, i.e., the French, because the French had been eliminated, the only people that the colonists really had was the French patronage, which was their army. And so what happens if you decline? Well, you're going to have people show up at your door, drag you out, and put you in the locks, right? And so it was really unfair. And the colonists, outraged at this, said, "You know what? This is unfair. This is not cool. This is bad. There needs to be the local opportunity for us to determine whether or not we need to pay these. Some places might need to pay more. Some places might need to pay less. Some people may not be taxed on that because it's an exorbitant amount of tax for what they do. Maybe we can tax something else." There was no working through this. It was a virtual representation. It would be like me housing everybody saying, "Oh, in order to put anything in chat, you need to pay me 25 cents." None of you would be here. You all would leave, or no, at least nobody would chat, right? But we didn't have the opportunity to even do that. And so this was very, very frustrating and unnerving to the colonists. It was the taxation without representation that they believed that only our own elected officials, only our own elected assemblies, the people that govern us should be the ones to implement and impose taxes. They weren't against paying taxes, but we needed to be able to say, hey, this is something that we should be able to do. This is something that we locally should have control over. And then from that, we can pay quote unquote homage to the British Crown for protection. They weren't against paying, they weren't against helping, but they wanted to do it with representation. Again, we wanted to sow the seed of independence. We wanted to be able to be our own independent set of states. And this, again, was another one that lit that particular fire. If the British Crown would have been lenient on this particular item and not so militant in their action, we might have seen something a little bit different. But again, just another pin in that balloon ready to pop. I really wish I would have done the balloon thing. I just came up with this analogy a few minutes ago. I would have loved to have done that because it'd have been great to show the example of that live. Um, but again, so outraged, obviously, people started the outcry rally, or the reality of the outcry, which was no taxation without representation. We know that they started to protest, and some of these were boycotts in British goods. Some of these were damaging um, the goods themselves. Now, one thing that I want to be very clear of, we hear exactly, James. Yeah, we never asked for it. It happened. But one thing that we hear, and I'm talking about modern times, I'm going to reference the events in California right now. We see the the rallies, we see the protests that are occurring, and we see the damage and destruction of things that are happening. And so when you look at this, what was very important about this was that they didn't damage property. Now, what they did do is they damaged and boycotted the goods. Why did they do that? Because the only person that would be out any money wasn't the person who was taking their ship across. It wasn't the captain who was paying the soldiers or the people to protect or his sailors. It wasn't the commerce person, it wasn't the fur trader. What it was the good, the British good. That's what was being ruined. It was the goods themselves that got dumped into. We didn't go through and destroy the ships when we did the Boston Tea Party. We just dumped the tea, right? They were very respectful. When it was all said and done, it was like, all right, John, sorry about that. We didn't mean to frustrate you, but we'll see you next week. Tell your wife and kids hi. We're not happy about this. You know what I mean? I mean, it was probably not that friendly, but you get the gist of it. They were there to damage the goods. It was still about relationship. It was still about commerce. because they needed to have and protect those things in order to maintain the welfare of their colonies. It was very important to them. So it's important that people understand this. Now, from this, the boycotts definitely damaged British trade, and it did two things. Now, it did put pressure on the British merchants, and they knew it was going to because you have intercolonial unity, right? So you have the unity across the colonies here in the States, and then you have a must need transport, but nobody wanted to do this. So, in order to, yeah, exactly. In order to do that, how do you how do you get people that their goods are being trashed every time they're not making any money, they're not making any profit? How do you get them to do that? Well, Parliament finally said enough. So on March 18th, 1766, just a year later, Parliament passed the Declaratory Act. Now, they did repeal the Stamp Act, but the Declaratory Act was an act that asserted that the British Parliament asserted the full right and authority to legislate for the colonies in all cases. Now, I want you to think about what this means. This meant that, and again, if you're in the colonies at the time frame, you're talking about wanting your independence. You're fighting for your right for freedom. No taxation without representation. And what happens? They come back and they say, well, we're going to file this declaratory act that says you don't have any rights. You're our citizens. And therefore, if you want to dispute anything with us, we're just going to say no. And from that was the fourth of five or six of those needles that would eventually get pushed into this balloon. And I apologize, I having a drink. Talking a lot totally dries out the throat. So again, a year after the Stamp Act was repealed in 1767, there were a whole lot of laws, and this Townsend Act was done. Now, these imposed direct taxes or duties on goods imported into the colonies. Now, they were glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. Of course, we're going to see this tea come again. Again, we have this taxation without representation. They viewed this as a blatant disregard of their complaints. Now, remember, hold on. Whoa, 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 whoa. Just a second. Eureka passed? Are you kidding me? Is that what I'm reading? Sorry, folks. I don't mean to interject. Starika was a member of the community. Did Starika pass? Holy cow. I didn't know that. God, I pray for grace and comfort for their family. Just put a level of protection over them and help them, their family come through this. Um, please, yeah, that's really sad. Thanks for letting us know, but that's very unfortunate. Good, solid member of the community. We'll need to keep them in mind. So thank you for letting us know. They'd definitely be missed. I'll uh, I'll reach out to Nick. Thanks, David. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's sad because Tarika was a solid member of the community. That's very unfortunate. Um, yeah, again, prayers. If you guys would, if you're the praying people, please offer one up for them. I appreciate it. Ah, it got me in the gut. Um, now, when we get to the Towns Act, oh man, I got to refocus. Hold on, that's kind of a bummer. Um, when we get to the Townsend Act of 1767, what we saw again is a blatant disregard, because again, the true purpose of these acts were to raise revenue to help pay down Britain's debts. again, we talk about French Indian War, the 7 Years' War. We talk about the support that they needed because of a struggling East India Company. And again, it was important to the vital aspect of um, Britain. But again, blatant disregard and taxation without representation. And they finally looked at those things like the Magna Carta. And again, you had to look at the custom powers by the officers that were produced here, where you look at the writs of assistance. And this was general search warrants that allowed for the military members to come in and look for private goods. And so when you look at some of these items, it was one of those things where, again, it just became a more oppressive state. It became more of a thumb in your face, kind of just total degradation of our desire to be free. And because of this, we really started to see uh, a shift from generalized frustration to what they call indignation. And this was very rapid. There were a lot of writings that happened. John Dickinson's letter from farmers in Pennsylvania was extremely powerful that urged colonists to resist paying the taxes. Um, they were articled by the constitutional agreements in Parliament. They looked at these, they were very important. They called these non important agreements. And again, merchants in major port cities like New York and Boston really tried to spearhead suspending all imports to the New World. And so this was really trying to put pressure on the economic uh, merchants and the British manufacturers to say, hey, you need to join alongside of us and speak up. Because again, if you don't, your wares are not going to be sold here. And we're going to have to find some other places to get that. Well, where would those other places be? Well, they would be with the relationships that we had established a decade or a century earlier with the French and the Spanish. And you would see more and more relationships growing. One of those people that started something called the Committees of Correspondence was Samuel Adams, not to be confused with the beer, which is good. But this was one of these people that really wanted to spearhead this. And the committees were essentially the networks of dedicated individuals who wanted to look at ways in which, in peaceful means, okay, letters, ideas, mutual assistance, debating strategies, how to defeat imperial policy. They weren't opposed to um, rallies. They weren't opposed to frustration. But what they really wanted to do is to educate townspeople on their constitutional rights and the perceived threat by the British Crown. It was more activism than it was anti-establishmentarianism. It was more of a grouping to discuss ways than it was a direct uh, uh, treason against the crown. They wanted to find peaceable ways to really get that information out there. And this led to some real harsh language and word all the way through the 1700s. And by 1774, nearly every colonial assembly had established its own committee of correspondence. They had actually created a cohesive network that unified the resistance. They shared the same general attitude, and we had a purpose as a colonies. We had a full on purpose, and this demonstrated that intercolonial cooperation, that one step towards unity. And what would that one step towards unity be? Well, the Declaratory Act. Now, this was a passage, the Declaratory Act was the same day as the Stamp Act, which was repealed for more legal formalities, but it was the political statement of Britain's unwavering commitment to parliamentary supremacy. The declaration was in direct contradiction to what the colonists were. They didn't like this virtual representation, and they finally said enough. And because of that, what they would do is we would lead to our first bloody confrontation and that was the Boston Massacre. Now, the Boston Massacre happened on March 5th, 1770, where there was a small disagreement between a wigmaker apprentice and a British soldier. And it quickly escalated into a large confrontation where a crowd gathered, and then they started taunting the snowball or taunting the soldiers. And how did they taunt them? Having a snowball fight. They threw snowballs at the soldier. However, this was meant to just kind of piss them off, being a nuisance, being annoying. Because the one thing you'll understand is if you've ever been to the Crown, or you ever gone to England, you've ever stood at one of the things, one thing you never do is you never touch. Shut that door, please. One thing that you never do is you never touch a British soldier. That's kind of a taboo. You just don't do it. And in this chaos, in this gripe, in this fight, whatever, what happened is a soldier was bumped. They were shoved. And whether it be an accidental firing or whether he got scared, he fired his musket. And that one single shot um, was then received by the other soldiers, and it started this firing. Now, they call it the Boston Massacre. And this is where political play on words becomes a little bit, you have to understand the history to really understand what they're talking about. How many colonists died? How many soldiers died? Uh, Not very many. Okay. Um, Now, when we talk about the number of colonists that died from that, it was five. Five. Five colonists lay dead or mortally wounded, in court, including a guy named Crispus Attucks, who was considered the first casualty of the American Revolution and later became the symbol of the abolitionist movement. Now, afterwards, the soldiers were arrested, they were put on trial, and they were defeated by John Adams and Josiah Quincy, who demonstrated that the colonies could conduct a fair trial for those who had been harmed, even their own citizens. But the soldiers were acquitted. Two were found guilty for manslaughter, but they were branded. That's all. They were just branded for their punishment. And this really, really set people off because this was a political disaster. And when I have Bernard talk about the Declaration of Independence, what's going to happen is you're going to hear language about something that says unfair trials. See, in this particular case, the unfair trial was that, if we were to do this, it would have been hanging, it would have been treason to the crown. However, for the soldiers, they just were branded for manslaughter. And this really, really became a political disaster in Britain. Leaders like Samuel Adams and Paul Revere seized the moment and started doing a big propaganda push. I mean, a big propaganda push. The famous Paul Revere created an influential engraving um, that depicted British soldiers as an organized firing squad attacking the innocent. And this is where propaganda, I mean, it's not the first time it happened, nor will it be the last. Propaganda is a tool of war. Anybody who thinks that propaganda was only, used a few times doesn't understand war. Propaganda on both sides is something that is frequently used. Um, but what they did is after he created this, the Bostonians looked at this and said, "Oh my God, we need to get organized. This is chaotic." It was distributed. They got public anger. I mean, the public was outraged at this, and radical groups like the Sons of Liberty were established and galvanized during this time frame. Matter of fact, the Sons of Liberty still exist, right? You still see chapters of them. Um, as you see these slides and these images go through, you'll actually see pictures of the Sons of Liberty. in this slideshow. Now, the Boston Massacres serve as a bloody symbol of British oppression. And again, this led to what everybody knows as kind of the one major event, which was 1773. Now, 1773 was 100 years, actually 200 years from the year I was born. And I love understanding the things that happened in 1783 and 1773, 1873, 1973. You know, most of us they collect coins. We do stuff like that because we like coins that were 100, 200 years when the year we were born in. It was one of the things that got me into coin collecting. And so the Boston Tea Party and the Tea Act was something that really surprised me. After they did all this stuff, after this massive political blow up, they would do the Boston Tea Party. And again, you're looking at the boycotts and stuff that had happened. But in 1773, again, you have the Tea Act and we have this Boston Tea Party. Well, the Sons of Liberty, obviously outraged by this, pulled together 50 members, disguised themselves as Native Americans, and boarded the British ships, the Beaver, the Dartmouth, and the Eleanor. They docked at Griffin's Wharf, and they surprised peaceful protest. They just dumped everything. They didn't destroy everything. They didn't cause all this chaos and all this grief. They just went in and destroyed the tea. That was it. It was just the destruction of the tea. It wasn't the savage burning of the Boston Harbor. It wasn't the massacre at Boston Harbor. It was the destruction of the tea. And so when we look at the stuff that happened, the original Nestea plunge, yeah, exactly, Pedro. When we look at this situation again, it's important to remember that even our quote unquote extremist group, the Sons of Liberty, during this time frame, were peaceful. We weren't there to cause. We didn't want to cause war. We didn't want to cause battle. We didn't want to get shot. We just wanted to make sure that they understood that we were disgruntled, we were upset, we were angry. And because of this, we destroyed the product, not just, or not the property. All right. So we do the Boston Tea Party, we do all of this stuff, and then we have this escalation into full on war. Now, this period, after all the presentations and the attempts for diplomatic uh, discussions and economic means and peaceful authorities and discussions and these rebellions just didn't didn't work. And so open warfare started. Now, initially, the colonial protests were spontaneous and they were reactive. And these violent demonstrations against things like the Stamp Act caused the Declaratory Act. And so every time there was a major interaction, we saw a massive legal move or a massive parliamentary move by the British Crown to seek and take more control because they were being justified in it. But what we had to do is we had to establish a committee of correspondence. We had to make sure that we understood and we could foster and collectively identify and purpose ourselves so that we weren't isolated, we weren't reacting, we were acting. Now, you guys hear this all the time. Happy 4th of July, T Bird. You guys hear this all the time. I tell you, when you're making decisions financially, when you're looking at collecting or stacking, when you're doing these things, act, don't react. Take time, look at the market, see what your goal is, do a budget, figure out where you're at, make a determination, make a decision. That keeps the emotional piece out of it, right? And for a long time, they tried to do that. But as the conflict started to arise, it became reactionary. It became, hey, 949, I appreciate you, brother. Thanks for the super chat. Thanks for coming in, all the support, the memberships the other day. I definitely appreciate you. Right now, you're king of the hill. You're the king boss on the screen. So hopefully that stays for a little bit. Take care, brother. Love you and happy 4th of July. All right. So as we dig in, as we kind of look at some of those things, we look at the Boston Tea Party, we look at the Boston Massacre, we look at where some of these things were happening. They were happening in the harbors. They were happening where we had interaction with these people. And during this time frame, we had something called the Intolerable Acts. Now, this was obviously designed to crush resistance and stuff like that, but all that did was create the grievance, create the disgruntlement through this. And again, we go from these time frames where we go from kind of peaceful demonstration. Now we start seeing more radical colonial response. And it's this radical colonial response that was one of the final pins that goes in because they pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. Now, don't get me wrong, there were atrocities that happened on each side. There were things that happened. There were belittling and letters that were done and accusations, and some of them just, some of them unjust. Some of it we just wanted the opportunity to be free. Others we had a God-given right, and they were being taken away from the crown, and we wanted to fight against that. And so the battle then became, um, I should say, the battle. The tip of the spear, the point of confrontation, would happen at Lexington and Concord, and this would be, the shot heard around the world. Under General Thomas Gage, they were stockpiling arms, ammunition, there were other supplies, and again, on the April 18th, 1775, 700 British troops, or also known as Red Courts, under Colonel Francis Smith, were ordered to go to Concord and to seize or destroy the colonial military stores that the British Crown had been told were being stockpiled in that area. And so they were going there, and then we had the alarmers, Paul Revere, right, saying, "Hey, the British are coming, the British are coming." And then on April 19th, 1775, the two confronted themselves on Village Green. There was a standoff that was there, and then somebody, and to this day, nobody knows exactly from whence it was fired, but a single shot was fired. And that was the shot that heard around the world because this quickly turned into a 20-minute fight. Didn't last very long, but it was the undeniable beginning of the armed conflict of the American Revolutionary War. And from this, again, you'll see that 73 British were killed, 173 wounded, 26 were missing, 93 Americans died in this. And so it was the first significant loss of life in our establishment as a nation. Now, there were little skirmishes and things that happened, but even the Boston Massacre was 5 people. It wasn't a massive amount of people. This was the first time where there was really significant loss of life. And it was a significant loss of life that on both ends really started to transform a violent colonial revolt. T-Bird, 6 months membership. Thanks, T-Bird. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here. Yep, from a grassy knoll. We've heard that before, right? Yeah. Wasn't that used for JFK? I think it was. There in Dallas, right? Did that come from a grassy knoll? Amy Harrell, 5 months. Thank you so much for being channel. Folks, I appreciate all the support. I really do. And again, if you're watching, you haven't come here before, maybe you're watching vertical or you're trying to figure out what this frostbite coin's about. What is all this American history? We're celebrating the 4th of July, talking about the history of the United States, what led up to the Declaration of Independence. And at the end of this, I'm actually going to have a reading from Bernard read the Declaration of Independence. And we're going to wrap it up with a little bit of what we're going to happen on this weekend. So consider hitting that thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. And again, my goal is 6,000 subs. I was hoping to get a little bit more. So if you could share this out and get people, I've got a really cool giveaway should we get there. But I'll be doing a couple other giveaways. Matter of fact, let's do this. Um, Michael Stacking, 16 months, almost OG. Thank you, Michael Stacking. Michael is one of those people who's he just had me on not too long ago on his stream, called me and said, "Hey, come on up." And yeah, I got to chat for a little bit. Let's talk about we talked about the First Continental Congress earlier. Great Scott talked about the Articles of the Confederation. But the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia for another giveaway of two silver rounds that have freedom and then the American bald eagle on them. What year at Lexington Concord did the, or excuse me, yeah, what date did the second try this again. What date did the Second Continental Congress convene in Philadelphia? And again, um, only one winner per channel, please. What's up, MLZ? Cash B, Cash Money, what's up? Good to see you. You looking for silver? What's up? Good to see you. Happy Independence Day, everybody. What's up, Jenny? Curtis, good to see you. How you doing? Thanks everybody for raiding me. Make sure you're smashing that thumbs up on your way in. So the question is, Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. What was the date? Um, the date is going to be given away. Second Continental Congress, folks. Second Continental Congress. Just weeks after the bloodshed at Lexington and Concord. All right. So the Gambit. Gambit, send me an email um, and tell me you got your two copper pieces. I'm going to put it down. May 10th, 1775. Gambit. Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah. And so um, the delegates from Philadelphia met from the First Continental Congress, joined by some new notable arrivals. We might know those people as Benjamin Franklin or Jan Hancock, a couple of different names. There was a discussion earlier about a very famous man who was included on all of the documents. Um, Again, he was there as well. But they were called upon to take charge of the war effort. And on June 14th, 1775, they voted to create the Continental Army. Now, why is that date important? Well, current history, 250th anniversary, the semi-quincentennial of the birth of the Army. So, folks, we just celebrated that, and the early release happened from the United States Mint of the Army Privy. And that coin just came out actually yesterday. I made a short saying, hey, by the way, they just opened this up at 1:30. You have the opportunity of going to get it if you got an opportunity to go do that. I think they're still available. But this is the 250th anniversary of the birth of the United States Army. So this is June 4th, 1775. We talk about the Navy and the Marines later on my community page. If you're a subscriber, you can go to my community page and scroll down. You'll see the birth dates of all the services. If you're interested in military history, U.S. military history, it's all there. Go check that out. It's a free resource to you. And again, if you like it, subscribe, do whatever you can to support the channel. I definitely appreciate it. All right. So they convened and decided that they were going to do the army. And so one of the biggest things that they looked at was um, approving a motion to name George Washington, somebody you guys might know in U.S. history. That might be a name that some people are familiar with. Was appointed as the first Army general. Here's a really interesting fact. There weren't any 4 and 5 star generals until way, 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 way later on. A matter of fact, most of them were only 1 and 2 star generals. In this case, I think the max was a 2 star. It wasn't until a later war where we had 3 star, and then in fourth we had World War I, I believe, was 4 star, and then the 5 star was alleviated or created in World War II, and I think we had 3 5 star generals during that time frame. But we have 5 total 5 star generals, if I'm not mistaken. Um, again, another piece of trivia, another piece of history for you. They also arrived, the ambassadors in the war effort. And this is one of the first times that you see the ambassadors who actually went to these. One of these being John Dickinson, John Jay. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson. A lot of these people were appointed to act as members of Congress to represent them, again, both in France and in Britain, and to kind of talk and keep these ties as peaceful as could be. Because again, even though we were in an armed conflict, the goal was still to try and foster relationship and community and minimize the long term impact of this because we wanted was freedom. And so once they were appointed, um, Congress authorized what was called the Olive Branch Petition, July 5th, 1775, and this affirmed the colony's loyalty to the crown, but seeking a peaceful resolution. Now, a lot of people don't know the Olive Branch Petition. This is something that is extremely important. But again, we don't talk about this particular one. This is something that when I was doing the research on this, I was like, I don't know that I actually know. I don't think I ever heard about this. I don't think this is anything in history or in my studies I had ever heard of the olive branch petition. So I wanted to make sure I shared that with you. Basically, what this was is it was trying to find some sort of way to do a peaceful resolution. However, the very next day, they ended up declaring a cause for necessity of taking up arms, and then they explained that they had the right and the decision to fight in this. Obviously, probably something was said, and they were like, "Nope, we're not going to do that." Okay, and so it didn't last very long. They were trying to find peaceful ways of fight peaceful, but at this point, it was just too much late. All right. Second Continental Congress, we talked about this throughout the Revolutionary War. They were important as to um, function as the national government during this time frame, appoint diplomats, sign treaties, obtaining loans from Europe, France, Spain, other countries to manage the war effort and to initially limit and not raise taxes to regulate, to act as a regulatory commission during this time frame. And they had done pretty good. And again, as we go through this, there were a lot of battles. We look at some of the battles where we had great leads, but some very costly ones. One of the costly ones was a very costly British victory that happened, the Battle of Bunker Hill. On June 1775, British troops, commanded by Major General William Howe, launched a frontal assault on the colonial positions at Breed's Hill. Despite the battle being named after Bunker Hill, the colonial forces, numbering around 2,400, were outnumbered by the 3,000 British soldiers, and they launched two detrimental front attacks that were repelled. However, it inflicted mass casualties. And because of this, they were instructed to lead their troops, or they instructed their troops to hold fire until the British were very, very, very close. And this is where we get the saying, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. However, what they didn't pay attention to was the shortage of ammunition. And this actually caused them to underestimate their ammunition, overestimate their defensive position. And on the third assault, they were forced to retreat because the British technically had won the battle because they captured that colonial position. But it was an extremely high price. They faced over 1,000 casualties of 2,400 that were there, and the British only lost around 450. I have that backwards. Yeah, British suffered around 1,000, but the Americans only faced about 450. But the consequences that came from this were pretty profound. And not only did they suffer, but they ended up demonstrating that they could stand up and inflict a heavy tax. And because of this, Britain was forced to kind of up their game. And um, again, we see additional battles that happened during this time frame. Well, after a while, it was like, look, we can't keep fighting this without making the formal declaration. And on January 17th, 1776, as it continued to intensify, there was a publishing, uh, there was a piece of paper that was published by Thomas Paine, a pamphlet called Common Sense. It was a 47-page document. It was very plain language, and it was an instant success. It went all across the colonies, and the arguments were very revolutionary. They were very direct. Basically, he said the idea of a monarchy and the ridiculing of the hierarchy of rule, of which one man's worth is more than a society, believed to be in the sight of God, the crowns are ruffians, the most that have ever lived. He denounced the king as a royal brute and said that the power belongs among the people. He ascertained that the British system and its very own aristocracy failed to be responsive to meet the needs of the people. And from this, he refuted the notions that the Americans should remain loyal to the mother country and portrayed them as a cruel parent, abusive, and that this new world should be the asylum from those who are persecuted and uh, should be free, the lovers of civil and religious liberty. And again, every part of Europe should send people to this place. It was a common sense strategy. It was very, again, very plain English. And the whole purpose for this was designed to garner widespread support. And it did. It was absolutely one of those things that not only did it support the idea of this, but the arguments, because they were so plain and simply wrote, that they just were desirable. And every American seemed that peace, that uniformity, that independence not only was just desirable, but it was achievable. And not only was it achievable, it was inevitable. And being inevitable was the thing that really lit the fire. So by the winter of 75, 76, Second Continental Congress reviewed this, and on June 7th, and June, excuse me, hold on. Ah. And on June 7th, 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia introduced the motion proposing that these united colonies are a right and ought to be a free and independent states. And this again, now the language of the Declaration of Independence would come to play more, become to play a bigger part in this, but it was definitely the thing that actually stated our desire to live a free nation. All right, we're going to go ahead and do another giveaway. I'm going to go ahead and give away another set of these um, U.S. Remembrance copper rounds. Steve Banno, happy Independence Day. Um, Not like I'm not going there, bud. But what I do want to do is I want to celebrate the true intent of our nation, what it was, what we battled through, what we struggled through. But I want to remind everybody something that is an undeniable fact. We are a young nation. If you go to any other country and you go overseas, you go to uh, China, you go to France, you go to Germany, you go to Italy, you go to Spain, you go to Greece, you go to these countries, and they have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of history. But the United States, as we know it, has a very young history. We're talking 13, 1400s. And so it's very important to remember that even though we are a great national pride, and even though we are a great nation and we have world impact, we're new. We have a lot of lessons to learn. We have a lot of growing pains. Even to this day, we still have growing pains. And so while we are the home of the free, land of the brave, it's important to understand that you look at social media right now, look at the stuff that's happening, and we have the same problems Rome had. We have the same problems Greece had. We have the same problems every society had. And what we as a population need to do is identify those and remember what those downfalls were. Immorality is one of them. And we really need to understand, not put pressure on people to change, but really understand the value of agreeing to the value of conversation and the ability to come into conversations like this and have discussion because what matters is the conversation, not that you come to an agreement. You can agree to disagree, but having the discussion is what's important. And when you look throughout the history, one thing that I want to show you throughout this entire discussion is that in this attempt to set ourselves as a free nation, way more discussion than violence. There were many, many more years where we tried to find. So if we continue along that, continue to communicate, continue to grow as a people, we're better off for it. And next year, semi-quincentennial, our 250th anniversary. And I got to tell you, folks, it sounds like a lot, but we're a fledgling. We got to remember that. All right, let's dig in. Next year, yeah, it's crazy to think 250 years is a short time in the scope of things, but again, we're a fledgling. All right, our next giveaway. What day is the day? Hold on, let me get this right. I got to say this correct because this is everybody knows July 4th, 1776. But what was the final day John Hancock signed with his bold signature? On what day did John Hancock sign with his bold signature? Total 56 signatures. But what was the day? It wasn't July 4th, it wasn't July 5th, and it wasn't July 6th. What day did John Hancock sign? Again, only one winner. So far, we've had Great Scott and Gambit. Congratulations to the first two winners. August 2nd, OC. You either are very knowledgeable or good with the Google. All right, well, congratulations, OC. August 2nd, John Hancock with his big old John Hancock. Well, we actually call it a John Hancock. Signed that. And he endorsed his copy and followed by the rest of the delegates. Again, total 56. There were 13 American colonies who offered to support their political affiliations and connections, declaring themselves to be an independent. All right. So, with all that being said, I love the Constitution, but this isn't the Constitution, brother. This is the Declaration of Independence. A lot of people get that wrong. They mean one thing and say the other. But it's very important that when we talk about this semi-quincentennial, when we talk about the 250th anniversary, it's not the Constitution. It's the Declaration of Independence. The signing of the Declaration of Independence is when we established ourselves as a new nation. The Constitution was a vital part of our new nation, but it was the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. So when you hear about the semi-quincentennial, it's not the Constitution. It's not women's suffrage. It's not any of that. It is the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So again, not picking on UOC, but again, this is something that I see wrong a lot as people are talking about it. I hear people who they say this wrong a lot, but it is the Declaration of Independence. And again, there are five founding forefathers. You see them on the screen, but these are not the only ones. We have a lot of other people who were implemented and engaged in our nation. So, OC Stacker, congratulations on another win. You won the giveaway last month for the contest. Again, if you haven't seen that and you're new here, subscribe to the channel. Go check out the short on the July contest where you can win free coins by answering a question. You don't have to be right. And if you're wrong, all that is an opportunity to learn more about that particular coin. That coin that we're looking at this month is the 1960 Mercury dime, a very famous and key date in the Mercury dime series, also better known as the Winged Liberty. Steve Bannell, thank you for the cryptocurrency and a currency-backed computer program instead of nothing. Well, yeah, I got you. A lot of people like different things, and some people stack gold backs. So to each their own. You won't see me do it, but it is what it is. Just like democracy versus constitutional republic. Man, I love you, brother. That is right. We are not a democracy. We are a democratic republic, constitutional republic, right? And this is something a lot of people get wrong. That is absolute fact. All right. So there is one more thing that I want to do. And I said this stream would be anywhere between 2 or 3 hours, depending upon how quick I went through this. But what I want to do right now is I want to open up a little bit of a session to just have some conversation. And this conversation isn't going to be you're right, you're wrong. It isn't going to be a hey, what was the date? Hey, who is your favorite person? We can include those things. Oh, thanks, great Scott. I appreciate you putting that link in there. Much love, brother. But what I want this to be is I want this to be a tell me a little bit about what freedom means for you. Now, you can do this a couple different ways. You can put this in chat. You can put it in a super chat. You can send me an email. You can have me read something online. And we'll do this a number of different ways. And why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing this because the 4th of July isn't just about me. See, I've sat here for a long time talking. I'm going to make myself a little bit big because we're at the point where we've done this. But this a little bigger for just okay. So now you guys can see me. I'm not this little thing. I didn't want to impede this, but now that we're just kind of having discussion, I'll make myself a little bit bigger there. But right now, this isn't about me. I have told you about the histories. Um, I have talked to you about what happened with history and what's going on with that. For the person that I offended and unsubscribed, sorry about that. Um, but what I want to do is I want to talk about what does freedom mean for you. So I would like for you to enter something in the chat, to do something, and to let me know what that means. I'll be reading them live here. If you want to send me an email, I've got my email pulled up. I'll be pulling that information up. Um, but I want people to know that there are many reasons to be thankful for being in the U.S. We live in a very tumultuous society. We live in a place where people's thoughts, beliefs, and processes are made. People believe that it's their right to tell us that we have to believe what they believe. And that's not what our nation was founded on. It was founded on independence. It was founded on the right to believe and to fight freedom of speech, right? Freedom of religion, the right to bear arms. All of those things are included in not only Declaration of Independence, the declaration of who we are. We the people come together. We stand as a constitutional republic to vote for the people and the checks and balances structure of the legislation, the executive and the judicial branches to vote for those people and to have discussions, but to represent me, not to have a dictator or somebody come in and say, hey, this is how I feel and this is what's going to happen. It's the voice of the people, the power by the people, for the people of the people, and they just act as a representative for us. So put in chat, what is it about the freedom that what is it that you enjoy, or as a society in today, what can we work on, and how do we do that? So T-Bird Stacking says peace, love, and prosperity. Right? That's a loaded question. Well, it can be a loaded question. The Bill of Rights was a demand, not a request. That's fact, right? These are inalienable rights. These are things that belong to us. These are things that absolutely are required of us. Um, there, a lot of people misunderstand the difference between um, a right. Um, what are my rights versus what are the privileges that we get because we live here? Don't confuse a privilege and a right. Stay safe, Amy. Have a good one. Thank you for being here. Cash, thanks for being in here. I appreciate you, brother. But what are those things that you think of? What are those things that come to mind when you think of independence and freedom? What does the 4th of July mean to you? let's let's put that stuff in here. Vote for Pedro. I know you love history, and I know you love um, world history, not just American history, world history. What does that mean to you, right? My favorite is rules for ye, but not for me. Yeah, I that drives me nuts. Um, I don't mind showing you respect. I don't mind showing you grace. I don't mind showing you dignity. I don't mind accepting you for who you want to be. But don't tell me that it's a requirement for me to do so. I make my own way. I make my own life, and I follow the rules that are set to me and governed by God and my country. You, as an individual, don't have the right to tell me how I should think skill. I appreciate your insight because your insights inform me and help me to understand maybe I'm thinking something wrong. Maybe I'm thinking ill of something. Maybe I do this and I make mistakes. And there's a number of people in chat that know I'm fallible. I make mistakes. I do things that's stupid and I call people out for doing shit. And I'm like, what? You know what? I probably handled that incorrectly. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But what's great about this is we can do that without being put to death. You can't do that in a lot of places. You know, you can't claim to be a lesbian or gay in Lebanon and walk away. They'll kill you there. That's not something that you can do. It's unfortunate that you have to worry about some of those things in other places. But here you have the freedom and the liberty to do so. And so again, just if that's the way you are, that's the way you feel, or you want to stack gold and silver, you think numismatics is a waste of money. You know what? That's your prerogative. That's your opinion. Fine by me. If you want to, yeah, and again, freedom is freedom. Freedom isn't something that is given, it's taken. You have to fight for freedom. You have to take your freedom. Now, in our society, when you come to the US, freedom is given. There are things you have to do and rules you should follow and laws you should follow, but freedom is generally given here. But in other places, you have to fight for freedoms. You have to fight for your liberties because they don't always have them in your best interest. Um, so, uh, if you want to get into Elsa, if you want to get into uh, the genealogy of where we all come from Africa. If you want to look at that construct, right? So we all migrated up. We crossed the bridge into Asia. We crossed into Asia, into Eurasian and Russian steppes, and then we crossed over before the major melts and crossed the land bridge, and then the land bridge was there, and then we were isolated. We were stuck. You couldn't get there anymore. So when we look at we're all we're all a generalized people. Now, over time, we adapted, we grew, our skin color changed, our eyes changed to meet the lighting requirements, our color changed because we were now living in areas where it wasn't befitting in an icy climate to be darker. When you get to areas where it rains and stuff like that, the melanoma and stuff like that, or the melanonin, not the melanoma, the melanonin in your skin has started to lighten. So there were changes that happened based off of where you were at in your region because there were certain adaptations that happen within the body based off of your environment. We know this. This is a scientific fact. Now, when we look at where we come from, when we look at where we're from, we can argue that till our face turns blue. The fact of the matter is we're all the same species. We're all Homo sapiens. We all bleed red. The blood in our veins is blue. When it's exposed to oxygen, it turns red because of the rich oxygen and that pigment color that occurs. We all breathe in the same general air. Now, if you're in California, it might be a little more polluted than if you live in uh, Arizona, or if you live in Wyoming, or if you live in Indonesia, or if you live in China or India. So, but it's still air. We all breathe the same thing. We all have to drink water. We all have to eat food. We are all one species. And so we don't have to get along. We don't. There's no requirement for us to get along. But what we should be able to do is we should be able to come to the table with discussion. And even though we don't agree, at least have the discussion. That's important. Um, Mark Cubbins, freedom is both a right and a responsibility. To do the best we can for the betterment of ourselves and the best for our world. We're all privileged enough to be a part of one. Absolutely. Absolutely. Very, very well said, Bart. Do our top floor elevators happen? Don't know what that means. I think I probably missed something. Vote for Pedro. The only time I ever felt true freedom was my life when back in the camping in the Denali for 3 weeks, 12 days without seeing another human. Sounds antisocial, but it wasn't. No, it's actually, it can be quite uplifting. It can be quite alarming to realize and understand that it's you and one with nature. You start to understand and respect um, who you are. And one thing that happens when you're in an environment where you have to survive is you learn that you're not all that. You learn that you have to respect the elements. You learn that you have to respect wildlife. You learn that you don't know everything. You learn that sometimes you have to take risks. You learn that sometimes making foolish decisions can lead to a really bad outcome. Not being prepared, not making a plan can lead to some very cold nights, or it can lead to unexposed, right? So putting yourselves in situations where you have to get outside of your comfort zone is extremely important for us. This is how we grow as a people. There's a quote, and I may say this fairly wrong, and if I do, I certainly apologize for that. But the quote goes something like this: subscribe. Make sure you do subscribe. Hit the thumbs up, by the way. But the quote goes something like this: hard times create strong men or women. Strong men create good times. Good times create lazy men or weaker men, and weaker men create hard times. It is a cycle, and we are at the last of that cycle. We are about to experience some extremely hard times because our forefathers fought extremely hard for us and endured some atrocities and problems that, well, frankly, just made it almost too easy for us in many cases. And because of that, many of us got lax. We got lax with understanding our roles as Americans, our roles as in a society, being able to talk with our neighbors, looking at things like, uh, you know, social media, and we don't even know who our neighbor is, right? Um, we only hear what happens when they tell us they bought something new on social media, or we get a notification that somebody was on vacation, or they bought a new car, or they bought some new gold thing, or there's an event happening, or somebody went to a conference or a concert. We don't talk to our neighbors hardly anymore. Now I know my neighbors. I know my neighbors for a house down, a couple houses on each side. When my son was younger, I knew everybody in the neighborhood as his dad, because he was all over. He was playing everywhere, right? We've lost a lot of that, and we need to get some of that stuff back. But you learn who you are in adversity. You learn who you are in the hard times. So Pedro, it makes perfect sense to me. Um, if you ever ride in the BART trains, think about me. I've lifted trains. Oh, I missed a conversation. Population phenotypes. Moral of the story still stands. Yes, exactly. Um, do this for one and for you. Happy fourth, brother. Um, we have to guard it too good in this country for seven. Yeah, we have had it too good. That's absolutely right. Yeah, and exactly. That's exactly what I just said, Gary. We're at the latter end of that cycle, and unfortunately, um, complacency breeds contempt, and we're at that point to where there's a lot of contempt in our society. So, what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a moment and I wanted to just share with you kind of the history of the US. But I did something that I want to share with you right now. So I'm going to put myself on mute. I am going to turn this on I'm going to hide myself. And I want you to just listen to this recording. I want you to listen to what's being stated. This is the Declaration of Independence as or narrated by Bernard.
In Congress, July 4, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly, for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince, whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, happy 4th of July. I hope you've enjoyed the lesson, the history lesson that I put together for you to talk about the liberties that we face, the troubles that we have, the opportunity to grow. But again, if I can do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and if I can do anything else, I want to appeal to just generalized people. And it doesn't matter what hobby you're in, doesn't matter your religious preference, it doesn't matter your desirability or um, your just kind of your walk in life. None of that matters. What does matter to me is that we as a people have the opportunity to have discussions, to ask questions, to gather alongside of each other and sit down and go, how do we really enjoy? How do we really engage the freedoms that we have as a nation? No, on this particular channel, I talk about coin collecting and silver and gold and stacking and how to protect yourself against would-be fraud. And I try to bring people who are way, way more knowledgeable than me up on the channel to give you guys good information. I have special guests. Matter of fact, not this coming Sunday, but next Sunday, if you're a fan of ancient coins, I'm going to have Aaron Burke, a world renowned leader in ancient coins, come talk to you guys about what is ancients? What do we need to look for? How do you need to do it? What do you need to look for? Subscribe, hit the notification bell. That is something you're definitely going to want to go check out. Aaron Burke is like the man when it comes to ancient coins. But why do I do this? Because I'm about community. Genuinely, ask anybody who's here in chat that watches my stream on a regular basis. I'm about community. I'm about growing relationships. I'm about building networks. I'm about sharing real, true, reliable information. And it doesn't necessarily have to just be about coins. Now, this is what I make this channel, and this special event was to honor and celebrate our nation. But ultimately, let's have discussion. On my July contest, I say there's no wrong answer because all there is an opportunity for learning, an opportunity for growth. Let's not be critical. That's hard for me to do. I'm a very critical person. Just ask my wife. Um, son's laughing kind of quietly. Um, but it's one of those things where, you know, if we just stop for a minute, we accept the fact that we don't know everything. We accepted the fact that I have to accept the fact that I'm often wrong. Um, if we can go into discussions going, I don't know everything. I don't know everybody. There's a lot that I have to learn. Sometimes I need to shut up and just listen to what somebody else has to say. Maybe I will see a point that changes the way that I view things, or maybe they will say something that secures my faith or my belief in a particular item. But what's important, most important, is to have the discussion. Act, don't react. Folks, if you take time, you have the discussions, you have good commentary with about what you enjoy, what you like, what you don't like. Listen to other people. You have the better action than getting emotionally involved in us, taking that and feeling like you're just and right. Just because there are people out there who agree with you doesn't mean everybody else does. It doesn't mean that everybody else. All right, folks. Well, hey, I am going to wrap this up. Okay. On Saturday, I have a special presentation that I'm going to be giving you. I'll be putting out the details on that tomorrow. Hold on. Yeah, tomorrow. I had to think about what today was. Today's Friday the 4th. Happy 4th of July, everybody. So pay attention. Make sure you hit your notification bell. You're going to want to be there. On Sunday is our question and answer session. An example of this is I had somebody ask me, hey, Frosty, when you're looking at the 1916D, how do you know that a mint mark has been added? It's a great question. And I'm going to have some people up to talk about it. I'm going to show you some examples of mint marks that have been added and give you tools and identify how to add if something's been re-added or if something's been changed. But again, I don't expect you all to become experts. Hell, I'm not. But I want to bring people who are, and so that you guys can have your questions answered. I would also like you to do me a favor. On Sundays, bring your questions. Last Sunday, there were a ton of questions, and it was a lot of fun. There was a lot of learning, a lot of great discussion, and that's what I want this channel to be about. I want this channel to be fun and engaging, but I want it to be educational, and I want it to be built on facts. fun, humor, stupid dad joke, but I want it to be built on facts so that when you come in to look at something and you want to find out, you know what it is. All right, folks, I appreciate you all. Thank you for the folks that have super chatted. Thank you for the folks that have dropped memberships. I definitely appreciate you. To Great Scott, to Gambit, to OC Stacker, congratulations on the copper rounds. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do one more thing. This is something that I haven't done for quite a while. I'm going to put this in here. This is going to pull from everybody who's still in the streams. And the winner is going to be the one, the only, dun, da, 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 Bart Cubbins. Bart Cubbins, congratulations. If you will do me a favor, if you will send me an email, frostbitecoins@gmail.com. Send me your claim email. You guys have 7 days. If I don't get it in 7 days, um, uh, then I won't send it to you. If you message me in a month, say, hey, did you ever send me my thing? I'll say, did you claim it? And if you say no, then well, too bad. So make sure you send me the claim email. Doesn't matter if I have it or not. I track it because I want to track these things. I hate not knowing if I've sent something out. So please send it off. I appreciate you guys. You're welcome, Bart. I think you'll like these copper rounds. But again, thank you so much for everything you do. Thank you so much for the support. Happy 4th of July, everybody. To MLZB and Cash Money and Jenny for popping in and blowing people in. For Mike and his wife for doing the raid as well. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys. Be well, be blessed. I love you guys.